Now you're live.
Okay, we're good to go. Okay, we're going to continue with our housing discussion. Welcome, everybody. We have with us Karen Horn from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, who has presented us with a memo of potential ideas to look at to be added to our omnibus housing bill. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen to walk us through some of those ideas for the first time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for the opportunity to have this discussion with the committee. Like everybody in Vermont, we're hearing many stories now of people who are considering jobs in municipal government, or some who have even accepted jobs in municipal government, and then in fact not been able to take them because they haven't been able to find housing. And while you've heard that permitting is not the entire problem, because there are all kinds of issues related to supply chain and labor costs and costs of construction and all of that, it's certainly a big part of the problem. And so we've taken this time to try and come up with some ideas in the nature of brainstorming to offer to the committee. And we did also offer these recommendations to the Senate Natural Resources Committee today in the context of their consideration of S234. So I'll just jump right into that and talk about what we have in mind. We would urge you to flat out eliminate Act 250 jurisdiction in designated downtowns, new town centers, neighborhood development areas, growth centers, and in municipalities with robust zoning and development capacity. I think you've heard testimony, a fair bit of testimony about what it takes to actually secure a designation as a designated downtown or new town center or no neighborhood development area. There are only 9 neighborhood development areas in the state and 23 designated downtowns. Those are in communities that have professional capacity and have put a lot of effort into developing the applications and actually successfully securing the designation. So I think that if you're thinking about those designated areas, there's a lot of capacity there, and a lot of the issues that are considered in Act 250 are also considered at the local level. And you are also talking about areas where you want development to occur. So we're hoping that you'll take the opportunity here.
So Karen, can I ask a question as you go?
Oh, absolutely.
So I guess that suggestion sort of in some ways goes beyond, well, it doesn't really go beyond our jurisdiction because we are the Economic Development Committee as well. But in terms of our focus and prioritization on housing, it seems like it goes pretty far to eliminate Act 250 jurisdiction for all projects in these things, as opposed to ones that are connected to housing. So I don't know whether changing the priority housing definitions to liberalize them is more consistent with what our committee would do before we jump into, I mean, like you say, we could get into commercial development and all that stuff as well, but that's not our focus, certainly not this morning, and not what's driving a lot of this conversation. So would you, I'm not asking you to give up on your proposal or idea, but would you be also interested in just seeing the housing element be liberalized vis-a-vis Act 250?
I think we would certainly be interested in that. And a suggestion that was made this morning in the Senate Natural Resources Committee was possibly eliminating Act 250 jurisdiction on a pilot basis. So maybe for 2 years, see how it goes. And I think that that also would be a reasonable approach if, to sort of build up a case for how it works and is not contributing to degradation of the environment overall.
Okay.
So that you're also asking about our second recommendation, which is that you reduce Act 250 jurisdiction over priority housing projects as is proposed in H511. And I think is in, I'm losing track of all your bill numbers, I'm afraid to say, but I think it's in your omnibus housing bill or maybe S270 that you were discussing just earlier.
Yep. Definitely in 511, I know that. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. And then eliminate the language in Act 250 that establishes jurisdiction based on housing projects, quote, constructed or maintained on a tract or tract of land owned or controlled by a person within a radius of 5 miles of any point of any involved land and within any continuous period of 5 years. And then there's similar language in a further section of Act 250 that talks about within a radius of 5 miles of any point on any lot within the jurisdictional area of the same district commission within any continuous period of 5 years. We don't know, we don't remember what the purpose of that language was in the first instance. And we think that at this point in time, it would just serve to discourage some of the kinds of housing developments that that we really might want to be encouraging. We would suggest that you, and I think this may have been in S270 as well, or something along these lines, that you require Act 250 and state permitting programs to render a permitting decision within a certain number of days, or they're deemed issued. And that is the case with local zoning permits. If the administrative officer fails to act with regard to a complete application for a permit within 30 days, whether by issuing a decision or making a referral to the appropriate municipal panel, a permit is deemed issued on the 31st day. That's statute in the zoning.
Yeah, I didn't read maybe Senator Brock can help us there. I didn't read that in his bill. I read the people would get their money back, but
That's correct.
yeah, I didn't think there would be a substantive.
No, it was not deemed issued.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Right.
That's a much bolder suggestion, what you're suggesting, Karen, but I understand it. Sometimes
Yeah.
courts could really make a problem for you. So.
Yeah, well, it is the world we live in at the local level, so it seems that it might be applicable to the state as well.
Well, I like Senator Brock's better because it sort of gets at both by adding a new judge. So that hopefully will reduce the time frame so you don't have those decisions. But I'm not sure I, for one, would be ready to just say it's issued if you fail to meet a deadline.
Right.
But
But although I would point out that this recommendation is not just for Act 250, but for instance, the environmental permits that are issued by the Agency of Natural Resources. And some of those take a very long time to get issued. And then when they are issued, they conflict with other permits from the same agency. So we're thinking about stormwater permits and wetlands permits and wastewater permits, those kinds of things. It would be really nice to have some confidence about when those permits are going to be, those permitting decisions are going to be made. I shouldn't say that they'll automatically all be granted, but that there is a decision and then you can move on from that.
Can I ask a tongue-in-cheek question?
Sure.
So
we love them.
So the same proposal of deeming the permit to be issued, would that apply to municipal permits that are not issued within 30 days?
Oh, that is the law today.
Oh, is
That
it?
is the law today and has been for decades.
Uh-huh.
That's where this comes
Always-
from.
Hoisted on my own petard. Okay.
We would ask you also to acknowledge that not all needed housing will be accommodated in designated centers, particularly if you think that there's only 23 designated downtowns around the state, and that housing development outside of those areas is often cheaper to construct. So you could facilitate housing development outside of those centers in where municipal bylaws provide for clustered multi-unit housing development, call it conservation subdivisions, in residentially zoned areas outside of designated areas. I know that might be a stretch for the committee at this point, but I think it is something that bears consideration. We are supporting the independent evaluation of the state designation programs that's proposed in H511. We think that's work that definitely needs to be done. Then shifting gears a little bit, this is a different idea, not specifically land use related, but authorize municipality to establish vacancy taxes for residential properties in town centers that have been unoccupied for an extended period and allowed to fall into disrepair. So those units would be taxed at a higher rate than the rate charged to occupied residential buildings. There are instances across the country where this is used. If you think about taxation, property taxation based on fair market value, if a structure falls into significant disrepair, it's sometimes taxed at a lower rate than adjacent properties, and not at a higher rate, which might incentivize an owner to actually do something about the problem. Springfield was one town that looked at this a couple of years ago. I believe they may have had a charter amendment to address it, but that's another idea.
That sounds more like a stick than a carrot. We heard some ideas this morning to try and get those properties developed, but it seemed like it was more carrots. You're saying penalize owners of dilapidated property for leaving them, for not developing them.
Well, for leaving them in a state of disrepair for an extended period. Because it affects not only that particular property, but the entire neighborhood. And a lot of these buildings are in places where we've designated for growth.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Senator.
I know exactly what Karen is talking about. I mean, we all have examples of this. We don't have a very big downtown in Woodstock, but we have a building that is in terrible disrepair, and we need some sticks and carrots, but we need to have more tools to figure out. I mean, VHIP is one of them, but we need some more tools for precious second and third floors that are empty, that are the building, and where the building itself is actually really in terrible shape and threatening the people who walk underneath it. I mean, where it is a hazard.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to figure that out. But I mean, VHIP is great for some of it, but it's not for the whole thing. And I think municipalities need to think creatively, and it's a challenge. So
Yeah,
I would
VHIP presumes a willing owner.
correct.
So, yeah.
I have a friend who essentially his family owned the Putnam block in Bennington, and it was really dilapidated hotels falling apart. he inherited it, and, it's hard. There was no, there was very little activity in Bennington to try and redevelop it or approach him to do anything with it. It wasn't like it was his fault. It's hard to understand how, I guess if it's causing cost to the town, I guess you punish them by giving them a higher tax rate. But it's weird. I mean, the Putnam block is now a showcase for Bennington. It's exactly the center of downtown Bennington, and it came to life through our work in terms of a lot of subsidy, a lot of programs, a lot of coordination. It didn't come to life by penalizing the person.
But neither did it come into its new magnificence because of the private owner. It came into it because of a ton of public money and pressure. And so if you just leave it, anyway, I think it's kind of a combination of things here, because that private owner hadn't,
Well, I mean, I think you go into the little deep. I probably know a little bit more than I should, but I think the private owner gave a lot to this development. Once there was some incentive, he participated in that as well. But I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, and we should get some municipalities in to chat about it, because I think we need to figure out the right approach for that to get the results we want, which is highest and best use of all the properties in our downtown and village centers.
Mhm.
And safe buildings that aren't going to have big cornices fall off and kill people.
Okay. Karen?
That just the comment regarding the cornices does remind me of a situation up in Morrisville a couple of years ago in their downtown. But I won't go into that right now. The next proposal is to revisit the local statutes around zoning. So the threshold to establish eligibility to appeal a municipal permit is narrower than the current language. And the appeals process has been used on many occasions to appeal permits install particularly multi-unit housing projects. And also you could disallow appeals that seek to reduce the number of units below the number allowed in the local zoning ordinance or bylaw. And in my written comments, I gave you the language that is in the statute today regarding who may appeal a local zoning permit, which is any 10 persons who by signed petition allege that any relief requested, if granted, will not be in accord with the policies, purposes, or terms of the plan or bylaw of the municipality. So that's that one. And then
so on that,
yes,
you're seeing in your member towns, you feel a lot of housing being thwarted by appeals. I mean, can you comment on whether you see abuse of the appeal system in turn? I mean, people have rights to appeal, but do you see them later withdrawn or clearly unsuccessful, and people are using it as a procedural thing to kill the project? Just a general, what you see out there.
well, I think you could find instances of all the above, and I could channel Erhard Monkey, who used to complain about this issue a lot when he was working on affordable housing projects in the Burlington area. But there are frequently instances where people in the community don't like a proposal, and they'll use the appeals process to try to reduce the number of units or change the way they're configured, or in any number of issues that they can raise. And we just may want to think about what is actually the purpose of those particular appeal processes, and how could we make it easier for the developers of housing to address those. I think I heard somebody else, and I don't remember who, I apologize, suggest that that you not be allowed to appeal to try and reduce the number of units below what is allowed in the zoning district. And a lot of the legislation that you've talked about in the last few years has been around allowing for multi-units, not municipalities, if they're allowing accessory dwelling units, they're automatically allowed. If you're allowing for duplexes, you need to allow so many units in the district. So I think the two sort of conflict with each other, it'd be nice to line them up.
So let me just be clear. Changing zoning ordinances, appeal rights, that if a number of units is allowed in the district, there shouldn't be appeals of those kind of permits. But aren't there all kinds of like conditional uses and setback requirements and all these other things that someone could question that also govern the development of those units? Do those sort of fall by the wayside as long as the number of units is below the allowable amount?
I don't think so. I'm not a lawyer, although a lot of people think I'm a lawyer, but I'm not a lawyer. But those kinds of issues get to your efforts with the bylaw modernization grants and the zoning for great neighborhoods, where towns are working to amend setback requirements and parking requirements and height of buildings in downtowns and those kinds of things. So I think it's a combination of a lot of different efforts.
I could see, for instance, character of the neighborhood is a factor sometimes in zoning regulations. That gives zoning boards and DRBs a lot of discretion, but so you're allowed to build a duplex and then someone comes in and appeals and says, well, I don't think this is really keeping in the character of the neighborhood, and I'm appealing on that ground. I guess what I'm trying to say, how do you balance other ancillary zoning provisions with the density requirement? Do they, I don't know whether you're suggesting that or not, but it sounds like you may be when you say, as long as they're within the number of units, they shouldn't be allowed to appeal. Maybe they shouldn't be allowed to appeal on density basis, but still preserve their right to appeal on many other factors that may be in the zoning laws.
Yeah, okay, so I would agree with you on that. If you're allowed to build 4 units on a lot in a downtown, the application should still conform to the setbacks or the parking requirements or distance from the sidewalk or whatever. And if you want to do something different, you're going to end up at the Development Review Board and
Right.
get a condition that addresses that.
Right.
But solely on the number of units,
Got it. Okay.
you should be allowed to build what the zoning says you can build.
And how does I think that may fly in the face of form-based zoning, or whatever that term is, where there's a lot of flexibility in the decision making that isn't rigid in terms of anything, density or these other factors. I mean, I think isn't it true that most towns, to the extent there's direction now, is going to form-based zoning, and that form-based zoning may say density is really not appropriate for this particular. We'll go in probably too deep into this, but at least we have the clarification that you weren't trying to say density is the sole governing factor in terms of whether someone could appeal or not.
No,
Okay.
I do think that there are a few towns, larger communities that are looking at form-based zoning. I wouldn't say a lot at this point, but you may want to talk to the Planners Association, Alex Weinhagen, about that for more specifics.
Okay.
The next proposal is that review of on-site sewage, wastewater, wetlands, stormwater regulations, and permits be internally compatible, by which I mean that the Agency of Natural Resources has looked at all of those permits together and how they address a project, and resolved conflicts between those permits and their conditions before they actually send them to a town. It's one of the issues that we've had for quite some time at the Agency of Natural Resource permitting programs, is that it doesn't seem anybody's looking holistically at once you get your 3 or 4 permits needed from the agency, do they work? Do they allow you to build a workable project? And that would be, we understand, a pretty heavy lift at the agency, but we think that that is something that needs to be considered.
We are going to continue to pursue the issue we work with you on in terms of duplicative permitting for wastewater and water permits between the states and the municipality. That will move forward, I'm pretty sure, out of this committee again, or find a way to the governor's desk. That would be my thinking and hope. So I don't know if that's on the list as well.
That is our last recommendation. And I believe that also was passed by the Senate Natural Resources Committee maybe last year. So hopefully we can get that one adopted.
Yep. We definitely want to do that. Okay. Does anybody we're about, we're 8 minutes away from adjourning. Does anybody have any questions for Karen at this point? We will put most of these things into our bill. We'll try and get them in legislative form, and then we'll take a look at them in more depth as we go through our omnibus housing bill.
I guess
a lot of your stuff, Karen, obviously falls in the jurisdiction as well of natural resources, so we have that overlap. But it's good you testified to them on some of these same things this morning, I presume, correct?
Yes. Yeah, we did.
Okay.
Great. May I just ask a question?
Yes.
Karen, for these issues to reach the level of VLCT asking on behalf of 251 towns, how many towns do you have to have sort of supporting this work? And does was this list approved by the board at VLCT? I assume it was.
So we adopt our municipal policy at the beginning of, or before the beginning of each biennium, and it speaks in broad categories about probably 100 different issues that the legislature is going to take up. And then we work with towns, and so for the development of this kind of a list, we're listening to towns and what their experience has been and where they see room for improvement or assistance to get things done. This specific list has not been approved by the board of directors, although we did send it to them. So, but we on a number, really what guides us is the municipal policy through the year. And then as more specific guidance is needed during the session from the board, which meets once a month, we'll ask them about that.
Great, thanks.
And who is the president of the board this year?
Jesse Baker, who is your city manager.
Okay,
Oh, yeah, who left Winooski. We
correct.
first met her on our tour when she was the mayor of Winooski.
Yep.
She was the city manager in Winooski.
Well,
Correct.
right. Mayor, city manager.
Right.
Any other questions at this point?
No, this is great. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Karen.
Thank you.
We will be in touch, and committee, unless there's anything else to discuss, I think you got an extra 5 minutes here. And we'll see you at 1 o'clock on the floor. Goodbye to everyone out there in YouTube land.